Hey guys, let's go build that form using Formik, and I'll show you guys how much easier it is to build forms using Formik. If you remember, the component without using Formik, it was pretty tedious. We had a lot of repetitive code, and it was about 80 lines of code. And technically, it wasn't even fully complete because we had that small issue where the submit was enabled or disabled on Blur. I don't remember exactly what it was, but pretty much hopefully you guys remember what the issue was, and I will show you guys that Formik will take care of all of that for us. So I started another create React app here, again using TypeScript. You can write npx. Let me zoom in real quick for you guys. That's good enough. Zoom here. You could type on your console npx create React app. I call this app, what did I call it? With Formik this time. And again, I'm a TypeScript freak, so double hyphen template TypeScript. Press enter with that, and you will get to where I am at right now. After that has finished installing, just do npm start to make sure everything is working properly. Let's wait for that. And once it's done, we should see the create React app intro here, the default. There we go. All right, so now again, let's erase everything we don't need. We don't need that, don't need that, that. Pretty much the only thing we need in our source file is the app.tsx and the index.tsx. So get rid of everything else. Let's go to our index first, like before. Get rid of the bottom three imports. No, sorry, undo that. We need the app component. So get rid of those two. Get rid of this service worker. Let me make this bigger for you guys real quick. All right, that's it. Go to app, erase the SVG import and the CSS import. Erase everything within the outer div, and just to make sure everything's working, we'll write hello. If we see hello here, then everything has been successful. Now, you guys see my code jump around time to time. It's just my habit of using prettier. So don't worry about it too much. Hopefully it won't be too much of a trouble. So the first thing we have to use, do to use Formik is install Formik in our form. So open up a new terminal, wait for that to load. All right, so normally, if you use npm, you would type npm. Let me zoom in real quick. npm install for short Formik. Now so press enter. You will install Formik into your app. I use yarn, so I'll just write yarn add Formik, which essentially does the same thing. Wait for that to finish. All right, that's done. So I'm gonna make this smaller a bit so that we could look at the documentation. So I am here at the official website for Formik. I'm at jerrypalmer.com/formik/docs/API/Formik. So pretty much I click this tab here once I got to his website. And this is the most basic example that they have for us. So to use this, we got to first import Formik using curly braces. It's not a default import. So let's go ahead and do that here. Import Formik from Formik. All right, now, before what we did, inside this outer div, we put a lowercase form element with the onSubmit event handler. Do you guys remember that? It was something like this. It's gonna be similar here, kind of similar, except we got a few more things. So Formik, we gotta use this Formik component. Let's just do that for now. Now TypeScript or WebStorm's complaining to me right now because we have a couple required props that this Formik component takes. It takes in many props, as a matter of fact here, many optional props, but the two required props that it has is initial values, which is pretty common sense, but I'll explain in a little bit, and onSubmit, which is identical to our onSubmit for the one that we have for our forms. Now, let's give our Formik component initial value. So again, this should be pretty straightforward, but this takes in an object with key value pairs of our inputs and the initial values of those inputs. So we're gonna have two inputs, and again, I have double curly braces here because it's an object we're putting inside the initial values. The outer curly braces determines that we're using a JavaScript inside, and the inner curly braces here, the blue one that you see, is the object itself. So we're gonna have two keys, one email, and the value of both keys is going to be an empty string because our initial value will be an empty string, and password is an empty string. The next required prop is called onSubmit, and just like before, we're going to make a method called handleSubmit. Now, before, when we define this handleSubmit, we did something like this: any, and we did console log values blah blah blah. I won't do that here. However, we had this crucial thing. We did e.prevent default to prevent our form from submitting and redirecting us to a different page. With Formik, we don't need to do this. It will prevent default for us automatically. And as a matter of fact, the function is slightly different. Before, with our regular forms, we had to use this e.any. The parameter that we get for our Formik onSubmit is different. We get our values. And what I mean by values is this object here, this parameter here, contains an object of the key value pairs of our email input and our password input. Notice right now, I don't have any email and password state variables like I did before. Formik's gonna take care of that for us. When we tell it our initial values, he automatically makes variables for our email and for our password by itself. So we don't need to take care of creating, using a hook, using useState to make our variables. Formik will take care of that for us automatically. So these are the two required props. Now we have to do something slightly nasty. We got this little context thing going around right here, a function. It's not pretty, but you know, it's what you have to do. Now, we have this parameter called props. They used to call it Formik bag. I don't know if they still call it that, but we'll just call it props. I'm going to define it as any for now, because I'm using TypeScript. And one thing that they show us to do is have the HTML form inside. So our outer shell, the Formik here, let me use pretty real quick. Whoops. The outer shell, this Formik, is not technically the HTML form. It's just a wrapper for our form that gives it all the props and all the setup that we need, such as making those variables for our input forms and handling the submit and all that stuff. And pretty much all the methods that it comes with is contained within this props parameter here. Now, we have to put a form or HTML form element inside here. And this is a little bit stupid redundant, but we gotta put this onSubmit. And pretty much the onSubmit we have defined here, this handleSubmit, gets passed down again via this props. Props, and it's within, if you see here, props, where is it? Props handleSubmit. Again, this is pretty nasty, and because it's nasty, Formik fortunately gave us something to make this simpler, and it's called this capital form element right here. What we gotta do is import it. I'm gonna import it here, and pretty much what it does is it handles our onReset, which we technically don't have here, but if we did, we gotta have it, whatever. So it will take care of our onReset easily for us, and also our onSubmit. So this form element here, we could just replace it with this capital form. So that's what we're gonna do here. Erase all this, put back parentheses, capital form, like so. Now I'm gonna click back, go back to this. So pretty much we replace this lowercase form with this capital case form. That takes care of all that stuff for us. Now, let's do what we did before and finish building our form, just the UI aspects. So within here, we have a bunch of errors. And that's because I erased a curly brace by accident. Sorry about that. Within this capital form, we're gonna have two divs. One for our email input and one for our password input. So let me make it for our email real quick, and then I'll just copy paste that for our password input. So again, inside this div, we're gonna have our label, HTML for email, and then email input type. Yeah, I'm gonna do something here a little different later, but I'm just gonna show you guys how we typically do things. Give it a name, something like that, right? So let's ignore our password for now, and notice here we have our email. Now, typically on a form, whenever we have our input, we need to give it an on change. We need to give it a value like we did, because we want React to be the single source of all truth. We want all of our inputs to be a controlled input. And optionally, if you want the good user experience of the showing the error when you on blur, we need this on blur prop. Now Formik knows that this is pretty tedious, so he gives us another convenient prop component. It's called this capital field. And let's read about what this capital field does. Let's see. Capital field would automatically hook up inputs to Formik. It uses the name attribute to match up with Formik state. Field will default to an HTML input element. All right, let's see. So this will pretty much take care of everything for us, the on change and the on blur and so on. So let's import that here and replace this input with capital field. Now, the only thing that we need is the name now. By the way, it's crucial that this lines up with this. That's not that crucial, but you should. But what's crucial is this name should be identical to our key within our initial values object. That's how Formik knows that this initial value is linked with this field input here. All right, so let's see what that has done. Refresh the page, everything looks the same. Now, it doesn't seem that crazy right now, but when we handle submit, let me finish making the UI here, and then I'll explain to you why this is so useful. So we have this. Let's copy this, paste it here for our password. Password. And do you remember, I don't like autocompletes. So I'm gonna define that prop here, turn that off so that we don't get that drop down with all of my email addresses. All right, that's good, that's good. Let's make two buttons just like before. Button, this one will be type submit to let Formik know that this is our submit button. And this one will just be a type button. It's not a special fancy button, just a button. And this will reset the form. All right, so that looks good now. Now, just to make sure that our handle submit is working, once we click handle submit, this method will run because we have told Formik that this is our function we want to run when we click on submit. And remember, now we get the prop, an object of values, key value pair, kind of that looks like this, except with whatever we have typed in for our email input and whatever we have typed in for our password input. And it is contained all in this parameter here, and we're going to console log that. just like before, I'm gonna use ES6 string interpolation and say email is contained within values.email, and password is contained within values.password. The key is gonna line up with whatever you have defined it here. Let's see if that works. Justin@gmail.com. Dolphin. Bam. Email is justin@gmail.com. Password is dolphin. Notice we didn't need to do on change here. We just had to use this field component that Formik comes with, and just had to give a name at a property to it. And me, optionally, I put this autocomplete of property into it. So already our code is a lot more concise than using standard HTML form elements, because we also don't have variables here that we defined by using useState, and we don't have on-change event handlers for both of our fields, just like we did before. So already it's a lot cleaner. Let's take care of this reset button. The way that we do that is, there's an easy way. One of the props that's contained within this props here is, where is it? Formik props. I think it's one of these. No, it's one of these. Handle reset. Reset handler will reset the form to its initial state. They should be passed into button on click, whatever. All right, so the way that we use that is we don't need to define a method because it comes with it. The format comes with it, and on our reset button, we could just put an on-click event handler, just like it tells us here. And we access that prop by doing props dot handle reset. Let's see if that works. Blah, 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 reset, and everything's reset. So that's good. Now, I don't like calling this props because that's a very generic term. Not only that, I like destructuring things that I need, properties that I need from this object. So instead of calling this props, let's just destructure whatever we need. So currently we only need handle reset. Now let's erase this props and just call it like that. Let's see if it works. Reset, and it works. That's good. Now, this is, in my opinion, I mean, already our code is much more concise, but right now it's only 36 lines of code. But the thing that I really like about Formik is the validations that it has. Now, it uses a third party to handle validations. I mean, there's other ways to use validations, but what Formik recommends is using this yup package for its validations. That's another third-party package, and you have to install it. But this is very powerful, much more powerful than what I will show you today. And maybe in the future I could show you guys some of the other things that we could do with this. Maybe I could make a sign up tutorial, which is a little bit more complicated than a sign in tutorial. Now let's install this. So what we have to do is, let me go to the yup URL. Yep, it's github.com/jquence/yup. And to use this, we just do npm install yup. Open up your terminal. If you're using npm, do npm I yup. Or if you're using yarn like me, you can just do yarn I yup. And because I'm using TypeScripts, I want to install the types that the yup comes with so that TypeScript won't complain to me. Oh, whoops, that's not correct. It's yarn add yup and types.yup. I only work for npm. So let's wait for that to finish. All right, so that's done. Now, the way that we import this into our app, if you go back to our Formik website on the validations, sorry, we gotta first import yup. Let's do that here. And notice how they import it. They just import all as yup from yup. So let's just follow the directions, import all as yup from yup. By the way, this is not that important, but notice how I installed the types.yup. So this will give us the TypeScript files of our yup package. I didn't need to install the types.formik because Formik is natively written in TypeScript. So we don't need an extra TypeScript type file. All right, so that was some random trivia. All right, so the way that we use this is we gotta first define an object that tells us all of our validation schemas of our form. So let's define that outside of our component, meaning not inside here. We can define it inside here, but it's better to define it outside because we don't want this object, this big object, to be constantly re-rendered every single time that this component is re-rendered. If we put it outside the component, then it will just be defined once and it will not be updated. So that's a lot more efficient than the computer constantly re-rendering, constantly redefining that object. So we will call, they call it sign up schema. We're gonna call it sign in schema. Yup, the object dot shape, bit boilerplate here. Now there's an object that goes inside here. And the keys will be our field names. So in our case, we have two fields, email and password. Let's start with email. We gotta first tell it what type it is. So we could have an array, an object, a date, a boolean, a number, a string, or a mix. I don't know, I've never really used this before. But our email is gonna be a string. So we first tell it that it's a string, and then we give it our validation criteria. So first thing that we're gonna tell it is we're gonna say that it is a required field. Where is required? Yeah, let's see. I'm gonna try to find, yeah, mixed required. So pretty much these on this yup website, it tells you all the methods. It's pretty much a documentation. And mixed, the methods under the mixed, it will apply for all types of the input, whether it's a boolean, whether it's a string, whether it's a number, blah blah blah. So required marks the schema as required. All field values apart from undefined and null meet this requirement. This pretty much is saying that we can't have an empty string. So the parameter that this takes is, let me first call it, is an optional message or a function. We want to give it a message. So if we're gonna say that this email is required, and if it's not, if it's empty, we're gonna complain to our users saying that this field is required. We have another criteria for our email, and that is it must be a valid email. Now let's see if they have an email method here, and they do. It's only for strings, and we just gotta use the email method. It takes in an optional message parameter. We're gonna say if it's not, if it failed this, we're gonna tell the user that this must be a valid email. All right, that's it for our email. And for our second input, password is also going to be a string. It is also required. Just going to copy this error message. And our second criteria is it must be a minimum of 8 characters. So let's see if they have min. They have one for number. They have one. Yep, they have one for string. So sets a minimum length for the string value. The min interpolation can be used in the message argument. All right, so we're gonna use that. It takes in a limit and comma, a second optional parameter of an error message. We're gonna say it must be at least 8 characters in length, and we're gonna say must be at least 8 characters. That's gonna be our error message. Now how we link this this option inside here, so we don't want semicolons. All right, so now I use Prettier to pretty that up. The way that we link this sign-in schema that we define using Yup is, let's go back to our Formik documentation. And what they did was their sign-up schema, they put it as one of the props called ValidationSchema inside Formik. So let's do that for us. Formik, no, I'll put it here, ValidationSchema, and we're going to put our sign-in schema. There you go. And then what we can do now is nothing. It doesn't seem like things have changed that much. Notice our submit is not disabled. The way that we take care of our validations, let's not worry about our submit button for now. Let's worry about showing the actual error message. And the way that we do that is we could use this another component that Formik comes with called the error message. Let's import that just like we did with the other components. And how we use that is pretty much this error message, and it takes a name prop and it has to be the name of our input. So let's put it here right below our field component for our email. Give it the name prop of email, and that will take care of our error messages. Let's do that also for our password. Let's see if that works. Notice we don't have any errors. I'm refreshing the page. As we type, I don't see anything because remember what we talked about in our previous video, where that is not a good user experience to be constantly yelling at the user that what they're typing is not correct yet. But we want them to see the error if they tap out of the component, like so. Must be a valid email. And if it was empty, this field is required, this field is required, must be at least 8 characters. See, now you could show them the errors. So this is all working with minimal effort on our end. There you go. Now let's take care of our submit button. It's constantly enabled right now. Formik comes with a couple more props that we're gonna use and destructure from this right here. And that is, let's go back to Formik. First, we're gonna destructure out the is valid, which is a Boolean. This is pretty much a Boolean that checks to see whether the criteria that we have set on our signing schema has been fulfilled or not. If all of these criteria have been fulfilled, then is valid will be true. Otherwise, it will be false. So let's take that out here. And we're gonna put a disabled prop here, and we're gonna say it's disabled if it's not valid. Let's see if that works. So right now, notice it's still blue, but as we click, it becomes disabled. And once we type something in, once its criteria have been fulfilled, then it's enabled. But we also want it to be disabled in the beginning. When I refresh the page, we don't want this to be enabled right now. So the way that we do that is we gotta destructure another prop called dirty. Returns true if values are not deeply equal from initial values, false otherwise. So this pretty much takes care of whether our form has been touched or not. So we're gonna say our submit is disabled if it's not valid or it's not dirty. If our form has not been tampered with, then it is disabled. Refresh the page, it's disabled. It's still disabled, but when we fulfill the criteria, like so, it's enabled. And when we click submit, our form has submitted, as we can see down here. So that's pretty much it. Let's see. Our Formik component has been only 51 lines of code compared to our 86 or something lines of code without using Formik. In my opinion, it's much easier to read. We don't have a lot of repetitive methods and such, and introducing all these variables. So it's much easier, it's much cleaner. And just imagine just how much cleaner it would be if we had more than one, if we had more than 2 inputs. Let's say we were dealing with a form that had about 10 inputs. If you didn't use Formik, your component would be fairly big. But with Formik, we could clean that up very nicely. And I showed you just a very simple requirements for our form here. We could make things much more complicated using our Yup validator. Now, it comes with all of these methods that you could test for. You could even make your own types of validations using this. Maybe I could make a video about that in the future. But pretty much this has been my intro of Formik, making us fairly simple but somewhat complicated sounding form. And hopefully you guys like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.